Hi there folks, Gareth here, and we're just about to get into our £300 computer build. And before we go live, I'm just getting my tools out and getting all set up so that I can just slip in the motherboard and get started. But first things first, we have to get in the backing plate, which is one of the most important things that I have forgotten to do in the past. So we'll just get that lined up with the back of the motherboard, which way round it goes, get it popped in there. And rather than post-recording, as we have been doing over the last number of videos in this series, I'm just going to narrate this live.
It's always a very good idea to install the processor and heatsink fan before you put the motherboard into the case itself. Okay, so this is our processor. Now we'll have to pull this clip up so that the pins can go in okay. So we look at the bottom of the processor, we can see all the pins there nicely setting up, and we have a little gold triangle here. Now on the motherboard we have the socket for the processor to go in. We can see we've got a little triangle here to line it up with. Pops in very easily. Push that down and that's that locked in place. So now for this, need to have a look at it to see which way it goes around. Obviously these clamps go on to the side of the processor here with the heatsink, but it doesn't go this way or that way, so we'll have a quick check. Does it really matter? Doesn't appear so. However, our wire, depending on how much our wire comes across this side, and then that bolts down like so. So our CPU fan plugs in here. We'll just do that now because it's convenient. So that's what we have. The CPU and heatsink sitting on top of the processor. This wire, I suppose you could put it the other way around maybe and have the wire pulling around here, and that would keep it neater. However, we're just going to keep it like so for the time being. The thermal paste is underneath the heatsink and it's connected now to the processor to create essentially a zero air gap between the heatsink and the processor itself. This fan will cool the heatsink, in turn cooling the processor. Very simple. Okay, so our RAM. Now a lot of builders don't tend to test the RAM whenever they do a computer build on YouTube, so I'm going to be putting the RAM into two of the DIMMs and then we'll test it later on to make sure that all four of the DIMMs are working, and it's very much recommended to do that just in case of a problem down the line. You don't want to have to swap out your motherboard whenever you're out of warranty because one of these DIMMs isn't working. So we open her up like that, we push the RAM down in, and these connectors just pull in almost automatically. And we've missed that time, we'll try again. It's not terribly easy doing this through a viewfinder on a camera. Okay, so there we have 8 GB of RAM on board and the AMD processor. Fairly simple. We could, if we wanted to, put the graphics card in right now. However, I prefer to wait until we actually have the motherboard mounted into the case, as there are screws here and here for us to attach to the bottom of the case. and the graphics card may get in the way of that. Might not, but it's not worth the hassle of working around. Okay, so we now have to line this up with the configuration on the back, and also these screws or mounting screws will go into these various holes around the motherboard. They should all line up as they're fairly standard fitting, and really if you get this lined up with the backing plate, the screw should just about be there anyway. So there we can see one screw there and one screw up there. The little metal bits are pushing the motherboard out a little bit, but that's fairly standard. Little bag of screws. We have a large amount of, well, there's different types of screws here. There are these little ones with a ring around the top, and then there are these slightly bigger ones with a larger ring around the top. There are the mounting screws, and I think there should be a third type which looks like this one as well, which doesn't have a ring around the top. Now generally they're all roughly about the same size, so if you get into a bit of trouble where you've lost a couple, some of them will fit. These ones with the larger ring around the outside generally go on the back whenever you're mounting in your graphics card to attach it on there, because they're just that wee bit bigger and stronger, and for supporting an entire card. Now, so there are some choices to be made, and these I think they're actually called standoff screws that they use to set the motherboard on. Okay, so we can't really line that up just right now because it keeps pushing it out of the way. You can see where the screw should go, the gold. Okay, so having had the motherboard in, these two screw holes here are useful to our build, as they will provide ample support for the motherboard. So we're going to put some standard screws in there. Okay, my little tip for actually putting these in, because these are pretty much a standard size, is I have a Torx screw head in my toolkit, which actually fits just nicely inside that. You can of course get the hexagonal bit, however mine here is too small and this one's a wee bit too large. Okay, so we can just screw that in quite nicely. Anything that really fits. Because you don't want them sitting up a wee bit too high, because that'll make your motherboard actually a wee bit uneven. So pushing it down against the frame is the best idea. And there we go. Now we've got several screws that we can use to keep the motherboard secure. So I find that using these screws with the collar around them is probably the best idea. Maybe the other ones fit, but I never even test. I just feel that these are larger and wider, and the larger surface area is going to hold the motherboard more rigidly to the case. Perhaps these are the right screws for the motherboard, but I have never seen an instruction on a case instruction to tell you that these are the ones to use. So as it turns out, that other one that we put in, which was opposite this, these two are not actually parallel to each other, as I'm now noticing. We have a screw support about there. However, this one's in place, that one's in place, that one's in place, and that one's in place. This one's in place, this one's in place, that one and that one. And then we have a little added bonus of this one here too. So we have 5 screws holding it in place. That'll keep it fairly secure. And we can go ahead and slip in our graphics card. Or maybe it might be better to get our power cables in before we start doing that sort of thing. So this is the big one that goes into this big one here. And you have to get it the right way around, but obviously there's a clip here, and then there's a receiver on the other side of this. This is flush, or smooth. So we put that in like that, and that's good to go. And then we have our power supply here, and there's only one place for that to go, and that's into there. This collection of wires requires the booklet for the motherboard to be able to work out exactly where they go, and then these are handily labeled. We have HD audio, USB, power SW, power LED, HD LED, power LED, and reset switch. So we'll just sort them all out one at a time. First of all, we'll start with the HD audio, and that seems fairly self-explanatory. We have F audio on the front here, so front audio. USB, which we have 2 cables coming out of for the 2 USBs that are on the front. And as you can see on the front here, as with the HD audio cable, one of these is blanked out because there's a missing pin, and that corresponds with the part of the motherboard that it plugs into. Well, honestly, you can't get it the wrong way around. You can try, and we got it the right way around. Okay, so this is actually the most complicated bit about building a PC, and that's getting your F panel, your front panel, correct. It's actually really simple because these are labeled. So this area here, the colored bit, is the F panel, and it corresponds to this diagram in the manual. All motherboards come with a manual that should have this in it. Okay, so you just work out which of these corresponds to which. So we have PW, PLED, power LED, hard disk, and reset. So we'll start off with hard disk activity LED. Now, it's going to be quite difficult to do this because these are all on the one, so we'll just have to work it out as we go along. So we're going to be putting the hard disk LED down in the corner here. Next up, we need the power LED plus. On the diagram shows it's down left, but it's the third one in, power LED plus. So that goes on there. Next one is power LED minus. So we have 2 corresponding here. That goes, we'll just put it beside the other one just for the sake of it. And then finally we have the reset switch, and according to this, that goes in beside the HD, or the hard disk activity light. And as I'm looking at this, I'm noticing that it actually says below it. Yeah. Okay, we have one more. Let's come over here, and that's the power switch. And if we look on the diagram here, it says power switch is these 2. So coming in 2. There we go. Now obviously there's a speaker and other bits and pieces here which this doesn't support. I'll double check that we've got all the cables in. we do. Okay, so next up we're going to add our graphics card. Obviously our graphics card here is I think it's an X8, and this is an X16. However, X16 should be backwards compatible with X8 and X4, so we should hopefully be okay to be able to just plug it in and away we go. If not, we'll have to take it out and stick it into one of the other PCI slots. So that simply just pushes in. For larger graphics cards, they use this little connector here to hold them in whenever they're particularly large, but this one doesn't. Annoyingly, I wanted this fan to blow on this heatsink. Even if there was a fan here, it wouldn't be blowing on this heatsink, so this heatsink is going to, well, it's pointing down the ways, which is, it's actually kind of worrying. And then we use one of those bigger screws up in the corner here. Okay, so I just had to swap the angle there in order to be able to get that screw in. It was a bit tight and tough, but it's in, and this is secure. Okay, so next up is our storage. We have to put our hard disk in, which is going to require a little bit of a change of angle. Okay, so first on me is that this doesn't have a caddy that you put things directly into. What we have to do is we screw the hard drive into the side of the case. One of the things about this particular case is that it has these holes here for us to be able to attach the hard disk directly on the side here. You can do it with an SSD. It has it imprinted here. There's HDD there and SSD here. So you would use these four if you were putting in an SSD. Now we have our feet there with the screw threads available for us to be able to throw some screws in and mount our hard disk. So we're going to have a go at that. Okay, so that's quite secure. It's one of the first times I've actually ever attached a hard drive like this to the inside of a case. Being able to put the SSD there would be kind of handy. So you can really only mount one 3.5-inch hard disk drive inside this case like this, unless you get some form of cage to be able to mount it in. In here there is a cage to be able to mount a 3.5-inch floppy drive, and on the front we have this panel for the floppy drive or USB drive or whatever it happens to be, but I think of them as 3.5-inch floppy drives. And that could be an extra bay if you wanted to put in a second hard drive, if you're not going to fancy putting in an SSD down at the bottom. So then to hook her up, we have a selection of power cables that are knocking around. Obviously one is for IDE hard drives, so we're just going to pack that away as in not necessary. And then this is what we're going to use. So that would be our power cable here. Power cable, I do apologize. Okay, so it's a little bit tight, but fair enough. And then we have another two, so we can put them in up there, and we'll worry about managing the cables later on. And then we need our SATA cable. So in the wee bag we have two SATA cables. We only need one. There's no particular way around that these would go. They have the same connectors on either end. So we'll attach one. On the power adapter, when we're hooking it up to the back of the hard disk, it's not as simple as, well, depending on what you have, these go specific ways. This has an L shape, a little indentation here that corresponds with the back of the hard drive, and there is a little bit of extra plastic at this end as opposed to this end, so we can only put this on one way round, like so, and it's a bit tight. And obviously this connector as well, which is for IDE drives, older IDE drives, they have squared bits here and then our almost rounded top, two cut-ins here, so that you can only get it in the correct way. We're going to put those up here out of the way because we don't need them. Then the SATA cables have a similar connector on them, where we have another little indentation at the bottom, so you can only put it one way. I find these to be quite flimsy. I have broken them multiple times on various different computers whenever I've gone in. So you have to remember to always disconnect these whenever you're tinkering around on the inside of a computer. And that's one of the last things I ever reconnect, because this is all plastic. And whilst it's easy enough to break one of these, if you break it at this end, it's a lot more testing. I have actually broken this off, which makes your drive almost unusable. I have some glue holding one together currently in another rig. Okay, so we have a multitude of SATA connectors on the motherboard just down here, and we're going to be connecting the hard drive to the SATA connectors. Checking the manual is always a good idea, as sometimes the SATA connectors can be set up in a particular way to receive a certain connection or configuration. Now it does say here that all SATA connectors have been set up with the 3 GB and 1.6 GB SATA standard. And they've all been configured for RAID, so we don't actually have to worry about what we pop in where. There's 4 here, there's 4 here, and then you just configure the RAID once it's all set up. So we're going to go with just the first one. We have to get this the right way around, so it goes that way to connect into first, and then there's a little click from the SATA connector. Then we pop that in there, and a click as well of the metal connector, and you have to push the metal connector in to be able to disconnect it so it doesn't come away accidentally. So we have a decent amount of excess cabling knocking around, which we will have to get tidied up. But otherwise, that's all our bits and pieces connected. We have our graphics card, our processor with heatsink and fan, our 2 RAM sims, our 3.5-inch hard drive, all connected up, and it should be good to go. So we are not going to be putting the side on just yet, because I want to test the RAM in each of the slots to make sure that all 4 of them work. We could do the same with the SATA and put it into each and every single one of these to make sure that they all work. That way we would eliminate any possibilities of error if we were to start expanding this, putting in more SATA hard drives and discovering that this connector doesn't work. There is of course one extra bit that we have not looked into. That is the installation of the AMD sticker. What do you think there? That looks pretty okay, doesn't it? A bit fingerprinty, I suppose. Might distract from the fingerprints if we were to place it there. Why not? Not bad. Now we have our indicator lights over here, so we'll get it set up. Okay, so a few little additions. Obviously this is a £300 computer build for the CPU. This BenQ screen has been sent to me just for review, and it's a very handy screen. It's only about £80. A Microsoft keyboard, which is about £12 I believe. Comes with a mouse, however this is a Dell mouse that I just happen to be knocking around. I can't find the mouse for this keyboard. And then of course various things have been connected to the back, an Ethernet cable, because we don't have Wi-Fi on this. So now the moment of truth. Distinct lack of turning on. Okay, so we have some noise. We have a light on the keyboard. And we have no operating system. That's a good start. So we need to go into our BIOS and check and see how things are working. We do that by, whilst we boot up, we hit delete, and we have the dual BIOS. So according to this, having a quick look down some of the specs here, we have our BIOS version is, there's a bit of lag on the mouse there actually, or F2 is the version. 99 megahertz, CPU frequency is 3.495, so rounded up to 3.5, that's what we should be expecting. Memory frequency is 1331, so that's rounded up to 1333, and we have 8 gigabytes of memory, so our DIMMs are working. It's currently running at 55 degrees, which is okay, I suppose. Anything up to about 70, you should start getting very concerned at about 70 degrees, I believe. And then VCore is 3.6 volts. Okay, let's have a look and see what else this can show us. So we have an AMD A6-7400K. That's basically reiterating everything that was on the first. CPU cores, the dual core is working. Turbo ratio is 39, and then DIMMs 4 gigabytes there, 4 gigabytes there, all enabled, totaling 8. CPU clock speed 100 megahertz. We're not going to start messing around with that just yet. Advanced memory settings, memory multiplier we've set to auto, memory timing is set to auto, probably the best way unless you're really going to start overclocking. I'm a bit concerned about doing that without an extra fan, I think rightfully so. Voltage, fair enough. PC health status, case open, yes, that's interesting. It knows that the case is open, I like that. CPU temperature warning, you can set it for whatever temperatures you want, so we'll set it for 70 degrees. CPU fan, we won't bother with any of those. Oh, there's more down here, second fan, so we don't have any other fans other than the one that's on the actual processor. Okay, so system information. Our date is correct, 27th of December 2016, that's quite good. System time is incorrect. And our BIOS. Peripherals, check and see if our USBs and all that are working. Onboard LAN controller is working okay. Graphics configuration, primary graphics. Okay, so we have Northbridge PCI, Express slot video, it's detected that, integrated graphics are set to auto. Well, we can force it as well just to give ourselves an extra vavoom. We'll not bother with that just at the moment unless we absolutely have to. SATA controller, we've got a Western Digital sitting there, and Super I/O controller, serial port A. Okay, power management, I'm sure there's not too much that we can do in here. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to set it up so that it boots from a USB. This is our USB. We have Windows 10 on here. Obviously you need a license for Windows 10. And I thoroughly recommend Play Asia for those sorts of things. 100% legit, and you'll pay a good bit less than you will from Windows themselves or Microsoft themselves. And we need it to boot from USB.
Okay, so that's a computer build. Check back in the next part where we're going to be setting up Windows and installing a few bits and pieces just to see how well the computer performs under stress and under various different benchmarks, and maybe perhaps even running a game or two. So thanks for watching. Thanks to Reichelt for providing the parts for this build, and check back in a couple of days for the next exciting installment of building a computer for under £300. Take care now.